Former presidential candidate Dr. Ben Carson is with us now from West Palm Beach, Florida. Dr. Carson, I want to go back to this question of immigration and Donald Trump's position on it, because politicians who have changed their position on immigration are responsible for a lot of the unhappiness in the base of the Republican Party. What do you make of where Donald Trump is on immigration and this question of the 11 million undocumented workers?
Well, I think basically what he is saying is, you know, there's no path to citizenship. There's no voting unless you go through the same processes that anybody else goes through. He's saying that he clearly wants to secure the border, put E-Verify in place, you know, tend to the visa situation, do all those things. But he's saying, let's apply the law. The Constitution, these things have not been tried by Democrats or Republicans, and then let's see what's left over. And what's left over after that is something that should be dealt with in a reasonable, compassionate, and fair way. I don't think that's a big departure.
All right, Dr. Carson, we'll hold off just a moment. We're going to be back with more from you, but we got to take a commercial break here. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We're back with more from former presidential candidate and current Donald Trump supporter, Dr. Ben Carson. Dr. Carson, I want to pick up where we left off on the question of immigration. You said Donald Trump wants to enforce the laws. So that logically leads to the conclusion that 11 million people who are in the country illegally, enforcing the laws would mean getting them out. But when you press the campaign on that, then they say, well, that's what has to be worked out, which a lot of people who have been in this paid attention to this issue for a while hear as code. They think that's building a back door to ultimately not deport the 11 million who are in America and are undocumented.
Well, it's not really code. It's using our heads, using common sense. You know, we have laws and regulations for a reason. We don't really know how they work because we simply haven't been applying them, and that's both Democrats and Republicans. You know, it's very much like your home. Because somebody wants to come to your home, do you let them in? No, you want to know who they are. You want to know who they're, you know, if they're your son or your daughter's friends, you know, that you say, make sure that you understand who this person is. It's the same thing that we want to do now. We want to protect the American people, particularly at a time when we know that there are people out there who want to do harm to us. This is just common sense.
And so I guess this is the last question. Do you have any doubt that Donald Trump will begin, once he becomes president, deporting the 11 million who are in America and are undocumented?
Well, certainly the individuals who have committed crimes, who keep coming back, and who ICE demands be let loose into our communities, those people will no longer be bothering Americans. We will not have sanctuary cities, and we will begin to do things that make sense. This should be something that appeals to all Americans. As far as I'm concerned, it should not be a partisan issue. We're talking about our safety and our security for ourselves and for our progeny.
Let me switch topics now. Donald Trump had some harsh words for Hillary Clinton this week. He called her a bigot. You suggested he not use that word. Why?
Well, in one of the left-wing publications, I was asked about that, and I said, you know, the use of terminology, the racist, the bigots, all of these kinds of things are detracting from the real things that we need to be talking about. Of course, they just say, Carson says, you know, Trump shouldn't use this word. But, you know, I think people are getting sophisticated enough to read through the lines now and understand that the issues that face America are gigantic, and they're going to have a big impact. And this election is so vitally important because it's two completely different philosophies. One says, let's take the pie and redivide it and equitably redistribute it. And one says, let's make lots of pies and let's grow this thing tremendously. You know, these are very different philosophies. And there are those who don't want to talk about the issues. They want to pick on these little words that people say so we can divert attention away. Let's talk about the issues. This is vitally important, and everybody should be proud of their positions. Don't try to hide your positions and deceive people into thinking something else.
fair enough. But the word bigot means something very specific to people, and it goes to what the candidate, the head of the Democratic Party, has in her heart. And therefore, if she is a bigot at heart, then anything she says about those issues is discounted. So this isn't just a kind of side word. This goes to the heart of her motivations about a whole set of policies that he's saying. So is it wise to just pass it by when this is the charge being made against her?
Well, it's not wise to engage in the name calling at all. You know, Hillary Clinton is calling him a racist, trying to associate him with the Ku Klux Klan. But where did the Ku Klux Klan come from? It came from the Democratic Party. Who was the party of slavery? Who was the party of Jim Crow and discrimination? Who was the party that pushed through the civil rights legislation and voting rights? That was the Republicans. They were established as an abolitionist party, and the Democrats come along and say, yeah, I know, but it all switched, and the Democrats became the Republicans, and the Republicans became the Democrats. What a total lie. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. A small group of people. It's still going on, still manipulating, still using, still lying. You know, do we want to talk about that? Yes, we do want to talk about it to some degree, but we really need to talk about the issues that affect the quality of life of our children. That is so important. $20 trillion in debt. What is that going to do to them? You know, why don't we talk about these things?
Let me ask about the pitch that Donald Trump made to the African American community in his speech. He said, and this is Donald Trump saying, what do you have to lose by trying something new like Donald Trump? You live in poverty, your schools are no good. You have no jobs, 58% of your youth is unemployed. What the hell do you have to lose? What do you think of that pitch and how it'll be received?
Well, again, you want to listen to what is being said. He's talking about the progressive movement and their ruling in the major cities of our nation. What has that led to in the last 30, 40, 50 years? More poverty, more incarceration, broken homes, out of wedlock births, you know, high school dropouts. I mean, how is that a success? And why do we want to continue that? We need to look at something else. And you're going to hear coming from the Republicans, which I admit they have been late to the game. We should have been into this a long time ago, because the policies that have been espoused are good policies, but they've not been expressed in a way that people are going to understand them or even listen to them. And Donald Trump is starting that. And of course, that's why he's being attacked, because, you know, you're not supposed to attack the sacred cow. These are our people. These are our voting bloc. Don't you dare come in here and start talking to them. But I got news for them. A lot of people in the black community are very, very intelligent, and they're going to be listening very carefully to what's being said by both sides, and they're going to be making intelligent decisions.
Let me ask you a last question based on your medical expertise. You've mentioned that both candidates should release their medical records. As a doctor, what do you make of some people and other doctors diagnosing candidates kind of on television and from the sidelines? Is that something that should be done?
Well, of course not. You know, we like to use real data. But I think one of the ways to eliminate that kind of speculation is for both candidates to release their medical records. You know, as people get older, a lot of things begin to go wrong with their bodies. And I think the American people have a right to know, because we're dealing with two older candidates, what their health status is, because it's a very intense job. It's not 8 hours a day. It's 24/7 with constant stress. We need to know that we have a leader who can withstand that.
Have you made that case privately to Mr. Trump, who you're in communication with?
I have talked to him about the health records and the health concerns this week. I think he's perfectly willing to release that information as long as she releases hers as well.
All right, Dr. Ben Carson, thanks so much for being with us, and we'll be right back. Now for some analysis from our politics panel. Jeffrey Goldberg is a national correspondent for The Atlantic. Ed O'Keefe covers politics for The Washington Post. Leslie Sanchez is a Republican consultant and contributor to our digital network, CBSN. And Mark Leibovich is a chief national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine. All right, Jeffrey, what do you make of Donald Trump and where he is on immigration? Nothing's changed, Ben Carson says, and Kellyanne Conway says.
I was just thinking about Ed's job. Ed has one of the harder jobs in journalism right now because he has to cover moment to moment Donald Trump's rhetorical and possible policy shifts on immigration. It's very hard to keep up. I mean, it really is. Obviously, he was trying to pivot away from a very, very hard position. He understands that he has a floor and he understands that he has a ceiling. The floor, his core supporters want to hear that tough rhetoric, but he knows that he's not punching through a ceiling unless he softens. And this whole week has been this vertigo-inducing kind of a rhetorical spinning, trying to please all camps. And what he's doing is he's risking alienating the base without actually punching through the ceiling and convincing people that he's softening, as the word goes.
Leslie, the ceiling that Jeffrey's talking about is this notion that there are Republican women voters, Republican college-educated voters, who are looking for some proof, and they don't like Hillary Clinton, so they're really going to grab anything they can, but some proof that Donald Trump is softening, that he's listening to advice. Is this a gambit towards that group?
Definitely, and the person who would know that very well is Kellyanne Conway. She's certainly somebody who's helped close that women's gap for Republicans for 20 years. And what's interesting, when you close the Hispanic gap, when you start to sound more inclusive and talk, instead of this white-hot rhetoric that we've heard for the better part of the last year, and exclusiveness, but more inclusive, you actually close the women's gap as well. And that's where they're really aiming. It's not so much communities of color, I think, as white independents.
It's a bank shot. So, Ed, is it working based on your reporting?
Well, speaking to some white women this week, actually at a rally in Florida, it was working because the argument, they're Trump supporters to begin with, and they made clear as long as the wall is untouched, as long as it's still built, basically, we have no problem with him modulating here on everything else. And so he made no news on the wall. He still insisted Mexico would somehow pay for it. So to them, they were fine with that. But yeah, he's got an 82% disapproval rating with Hispanics. He's not going anywhere there. Jeffrey says it's a hard job. It reminded me this week of covering Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio a year ago. While their immigration policy was pretty clear, they would subtly modulate every once in a while and say something slightly different, and you'd have to be attuned to that. And I think the folks covering Trump closely got a taste of that this week. But at the end of the week, he's back to where he was. Nothing changed. I think Leslie's right. It may have confused things enough for some voters who were skeptical of him to say, well, at least he was talking about it, when in reality it sounds like nothing will change.
But we expect the shilly-shally from regular politicians that you name. But Donald Trump has built his brand on, I say it, it's true, and he's built his brand on immigration, his central signature issue.
Correct. No, I would say that this week has been a very muddled week for whatever that immigration message is. I mean, his, like you said, his brand has been one of decisiveness. It will be one of, a deportation police. He explicitly talked about a deportation force several months ago. And when you ask Kellyanne or any of his surrogates or him himself, he sort of says, we'll have to wait and see now. You do sort of wonder, is this modulated, softened tone going to win him, any new supporters, but will it alienate the base, the people who sort of brought him here?
Well, there's a point to be made to that. You can ask Marco Rubio, dial them, or John McCain what happens when you shift on immigration, because among the hardliners, there's no going back. There's two key words, right? There's amnesty and the wall. And on those areas, hardliners never move, but it's a losing issue for Republicans. It is not possible to build a contiguous wall across the U.S.-Mexico border. It's not going to happen. You have the Rio Grande River, you have river floodplains. It's just not feasible. And I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. They have to find an approach that works.
And where are we in? Last week, Donald Trump expressed regret. Leslie talked about Kellyanne Conway's talent is for helping candidates pitch to different constituencies. Where are we in the Donald Trump evolution? Is this a new version of Donald Trump? When he called Hillary Clinton a bigot, that got some people concerned that he was going back to the old Trump. Where do things stand now?
I don't see any real discernible movement towards a warmer, fuzzier Trump when he says things like that, when he fires off these tweets about Dwayne Wade's cousin and says, vote for me, before a few hours later expressing condolences, when he continues to talk about a deportation, or his surrogates talk about a deportation force or illegals or the Hispanics. None of that works. None of it will work. And the voters I talk to, the experts that look at this I talk to say, like, this is, if he's going to be transactional like that, it may just make it worse for him in any attempt to try to be a unifying figure. If it gives some comfort to skeptical Republicans, fine. But they should have been expressing that concern a year ago. This has been baked for a while.
Yeah, it is a little late to be sort of to try the unifying figure thing, I would say. I mean, people
it's
talk.
not his nature.
It's
I
just
just
not
think
his
it's
nature.
exactly.
I mean, I think one thing again. I mean, what was one of his biggest assets was the decisiveness. I mean, this was a sort of confused version where, okay, where does he stand after all? And people talk about the bigot, saying, okay, he called Hillary Clinton a bigot. I mean, this is not in a vacuum. I mean, this came after a pretty blistering speech that Hillary Clinton gave. I guess it was Wednesday on the alt-right movement, which to me was striking. One, in that it was not actually a name-calling speech. It was using his own words, his own policy, his own history, pretty, I think, cohesively against him. And what was striking about the reaction was, other than Donald Trump saying she's a bigot, there was really, unless I missed it, there were not a lot of Republican leaders, a lot of traditional Republicans who were rising to his defense, which I think spoke volumes, maybe more so than whatever came out of his mouth.
And by the way, the purpose of one of the purposes of that speech was to force him to revert back to his usual self, which is he has said, I'm attacked, I will attack. So they predicted, the Clinton campaign pretty much knew that he would say something bigot in this case, and that again is trying to bring him back to what they think of as his true nature, where he's moving, I think, again on immigration and other issues, the confrontational, the harsh language. No matter how much they try to muddy it up this week, we're back to where we were. I think
it was probably also Hillary Clinton trying to change the topic from her own bad news, which we'll switch to in a moment. But Leslie, let me ask you this question about what Hillary Clinton tried to do in that speech, which is hive off or cut off Republicans from Trump, saying he has this relationship to this nationalist, racist group, but that's not Republicans. Do you think that will be successful? She's defending the party against Donald Trump. Does Hillary Clinton have any standing to do that?
I think there are a lot of Republicans who tried to do the same thing earlier in the primary. What finally came out, if we go back to earlier this year, is Donald Trump disavowed, denounced any of these organizations, these extremists who supported his campaign, and distanced himself to the best of his ability. Did he do it quickly? No. He waited too long. It was in the media cycle, especially in Iowa, when there were these accusations of robocalls by some of these white extremists that were impacting the caucuses. I don't think it's new. I don't think it's particularly effective, because on that particular issue, people have made up their mind. Now they're trying to decide it's the lesser of two evils, so to speak. It's really not tone at this point.
Well, I would say, well, I'm sorry.
Well, I would just, to me, when she talks like that is less about winning over Republican voters. It's about sort of reminding Republican lawmakers that when you get back to town, should I be president, I still want to work with you. I understand the difference between you, Paul Ryan, and Mitch McConnell, than you, Donald Trump. And that if I'm going to be a successful president, I'm going to need to find a way to work with you on something. That, to me, is just code. It's her saying to them, I see the difference.
Yes, although I do think that it is targeted directly at Republican voters, particularly in the suburbs of Cleveland, Denver, and so forth. And look, if you look at the numbers since the conventions, I mean, her numbers she's probably gained about 8 or 9 points, from, if you believe the deficit she was at coming in. I mean, these are Republican voters. I mean, the Democratic convention was geared very, very explicitly and very, very clearly, I think, at Republicans, at mainstream Republicans, at Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio Republicans, what have you. And I think it's been very effective, and I think it's going to continue.
And this is an attempt also, they see him trying to pivot, and they're trying to say you can't pivot away from this.
I also don't think that it's only directed at Republicans. I mean, this is a get out the vote attempt by Hillary Clinton to remind Hispanics, blacks, Asians, everyone, that these are the people he's associated with. It's very important to mobilize those numbers, and that's how you do it. I don't think it's ineffective at all. I think it's very effective to remind people that David Duke likes Donald Trump. I think that works.
There's the same kind of argument was made in 2008 when people were talking about the alignments and the associations that Barack Obama had through the history of his grassroots campaigning. People have such a baked-in idea, especially Republicans, when it comes to Hillary Clinton, right? So for many Republicans who never thought they would see themselves in a position of voting for Hillary Clinton, it's not going to be moved on this identity politics as much as who's going to be changing the direction of the country.
All right, we're going to be back and talk about Hillary Clinton's news this week. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. And we're back with more from our politics panel. Mark, I'll start with you. Hillary Clinton this week, there were two disclosures or two developments. One, a set of emails that showed a kind of cozy relationship between staffers at the Clinton Foundation and staffers at the State Department. And then 15,000 or so new emails are found that weren't turned over from the homebrew server. Take either one of those you want, and whether this is, this is coming up periodically, and one expects it will until election.
It is. It's a dull ache for them. I mean, what's interesting about this week is it links the two kind of big lurking issues, email and the foundation. I mean, it really sort of brought them together into the same conversation. Frankly, this was a bad week for it should have been a bad week for the Clinton campaign. I think, again, the Trump campaign kind of muddled its own advantage by talking about Hillary Clinton's health and what have you. But you do sort of wonder why. I mean, with the foundation at least. I mean, a lot of people have suggested why not turn over the operations of the foundation going forward to, say, the Gates Foundation or someone who knows how to do this, who can incorporate all of the resources. I realize it's complicated, but it could foreclose a lot of these suspicions. It could be a sort of decisive answer, and I think their unwillingness to do this and to try to sort of litigate this, maybe more than they need to, gets to a kind of something between entitlement and maybe false confidence in this election.
Here's what I wonder, Jeffrey. Hillary Clinton, about 30% of the people trust her. Mm-hmm. So the response from the Clinton camp to these questions of these emails clearly show that when somebody from the Clinton Foundation sends an email, there's some fussing around to try to help them out. Now, maybe there's not a pay to play, but there's a lot of activity based on the fact that people have given a lot of money. And the Clinton campaign says nobody got any meeting or anything because they gave donation. Does that pass the smell test?
Look, there's a presumption of nefariousness on the part of the foundation and the Clintons. In this particular case, look, I agree that the foundation probably should have been, to borrow a phrase, walled off a while ago, right? that there should have been a way to put that in trust. That said, this story there, I think there's less than meets the eye. I mean, most of the people who we're talking about, there's a Nobel Prize winner, for instance, from Bangladesh, who would get a meeting with any Secretary of State. There are heads of state who have given money to the foundation who would get meetings with the Secretary of State. And the problem here is that no one can prove that these people got anything out of these meetings. All that said, there's an appearance of coziness, I guess is the word that you're using.
And if you won't even admit a little coziness, I mean, Leslie Donna Brazil said basically, Republicans see it as nefarious, Democrats call it a meeting, but the Clinton campaign's barely even saying it's a meeting. They're saying there was no relationship here at all. Don't they have to admit a little bit that, yes, okay, you get some emails got returned, but, some people got a meeting, some people didn't, and it's not as bad as you think. But they're not even saying that.
No, it's what your definition of meeting is. This is clearly pay-to-play scheme. And as much as Republicans like to use that in their talking points, there's so much smoke there that the bigger question is, isn't this part of the pall that always surrounds the Clintons? It brings you back to selling access to the Lincoln bedroom, all the different things that come part of this package deal of Bill and Hillary Clinton. So I would even say that the independents who are looking at possibly supporting Hillary Clinton are looking at this again and saying, here we are on these corruption ideas.
I'm sorry, but show me one thing that someone got from Hillary Clinton's State Department because they happened to give money to the Clinton.
Well, they did get the meetings. I mean, there is this email train between.
I'm waiting for actual
well,
evidence.
they've asked for
something.
investigation.
I'm waiting.
That's because your bar is meeting doesn't mean anything because there are a lot of meetings that happen.
She has 100 meetings a week.
But there are these emails between Doug Band and Humed that came out this week that said, look, this is a friend of ours. Maybe you can do this. And then they get a short, but a meeting nonetheless. I mean, yes, maybe the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia would get the meeting anyway, but this is clearly, you would think, but these are skids being greased, and there's actually email traffic.
Part of this is very interesting, because part of this is why Donald Trump is succeeding to the degree that he succeeded. This is Washington. People who know each other and who are influential meet with other influential people they happen to know and who know people. That's human nature and that's politics, and this is what people outside of Washington do find disgusting. This is not a Clinton-specific issue. This is an example of it.
We're going to have to go, but people who write big checks get things that they want, even if it's not the big casino, they get what they want, and that's what makes people sick about Washington.
Right.
Yes. That's going to be it for us today. Thanks to all of you for watching, and we'll be back in a moment. We'd like to close today by congratulating CBS Sunday Morning anchor Charles Osgood, who announced this morning he will retire from the broadcast next month after 22 years at the helm. The Osgood file will go on, however, so as he says, we'll keep seeing him on the radio for years to come. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.